But the number one reason why most adults will not commit to something new is that fear of embarrassment. Yeah. And it might be disappointment or judging or a word related to embarrassment, but it's not the fear of failure. It's the fear of how will others perceive me if I fail? And maybe more importantly, how will I perceive myself?
Hi and welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. This is your host Vanessa Rose at peopleHum.
peopleHum is an end-to-end one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and the video channel, which receives upwards of 200,000 visitors a year and publish around 2 interviews with well-known names globally every month.
We have with us today Michael Reddington, the president at InQuasive Inc. Michael is of the belief that confrontation creates compliance and compliance creates resentment. He researched and developed the disciplined listening method to teach executives, sales professionals, HR professionals to increase commitments to action and reduce missed opportunities. At InQuasive Inc., he teaches business professionals how to activate the truth with the application of strategic, ethical persuasion techniques. Welcome, Michael. We are thrilled to have you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So, Michael, can you tell us a little bit about your company, InQuasive Inc?
Certainly. I appreciate you asking. At InQuasive, you just covered the top line of what we do. We teach people how to use the truth to their advantage by applying strategic, ethical persuasion techniques. Really, I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to start InQuasive after a full-time career in the world of non-confrontational interview and interrogation. And as a certified forensic interviewer, among all of the techniques that we learned, first and foremost, within that, I guess it's two things where, number one, how do we always communicate with people in a way that is respectful? And number two, from an observation standpoint, how do we always maintain a contextual awareness to really perceive the value of everything going on around us? So with InQuasive, it's really all about teaching executives either through our seminars, whether it's leadership communication, sales negotiation, candidate interviewing, or beyond, or with our advisory services, teaching them in order to think and observe the same way. And for me personally, I was really motivated to do this when my research led me to two key realizations. First, the very best leaders and the very best interrogators capitalize on the same two core skills: vision and influence. And second, the cognitive process that interrogation suspects experience when they commit to truthfully saying I did it is essentially identical to the cognitive processes that customers experience when they commit to saying I'll buy it and employees experience when they commit to saying I'll do it. So with that in mind, we had the opportunity to combine research and best practices from across the spectrum of business communication with the very best non-confrontational interview and interrogation techniques from both sides of the Atlantic to put these packages together. And it's been really exciting for us.
It sounds really fun.
It is, but I'm biased.
Yeah. So, Michael, you mentioned that you started out in your interrogation career as someone who truly realized the value of communication through his work. That it creates bonds between people like nothing else. So, how would you suggest leaders apply their communication skills to ensure long-term productivity in what is now an increasingly challenging workplace?
That's a great question, and there's really two ways to look at it, and of course they'll overlap, the tactical approach and the strategic approach. And from a tactical perspective, it's all about what are the little things we can do every day to create an environment where people feel comfortable communicating. So in a world where, right now we're having this conversation where many of us aren't going to work every day anymore, or at least not in the same facilities. But in a world where we do see people every day, it's important that we don't pass somebody without acknowledging them. Just literally saying hello to somebody and smiling every time we walk past them is enough to at least let them know that they're alive in our world. We validate their existence. From a listening standpoint, one of the things that can be tough for leaders, whether it is their focus on time or all of the pressures that they face, or just feeling like they have the right answers and they're running out of patience. But from a communication standpoint, one of the most important things we can all do is stop interrupting people. Is when we interrupt people, we literally devalue them. You don't have anything more important to say than I do. I already have this figured out. It's your turn to listen to me. So avoiding interrupting is paramount. And one of the other things that we often don't think about is during our conversations, we may smile and nod and maintain culturally appropriate eye contact and distance and spacing and those things. And we might even summarize a few things that we hear people say. So we can make it feel like we listened during the conversation. But if we want to prove to somebody that we listened and leave no doubt in their mind that we listened to what they said, we have to follow up after the conversation at some point. We have to either talk about what we're doing as a result of the conversation, or talk about what we learned from the conversation, or just reintroduce something that they said at a later date in order for them to truly believe that we listened and give them tangible evidence that they can trust us. When it comes to leadership through communication, and this gets to kind of more the strategic side, it's important to remember that the number one fear that will stop most people from doing most things is not failure. It's embarrassment. It's feeling like we're being judged. So at all during our communication, if we can really avoid embarrassing people by accident, hopefully we're not doing it on purpose to begin with, but if we can really focus on not causing people to feel stupid or ashamed or embarrassed or judged, we'll be so much further down the line. And one of the ways that leaders can do that is by valuing the process over the results. Mm-hmm. Too many times from a coaching or a mentoring or even a discipline type situation, we get so focused on the results that we lose track of the fact, that somebody might have had 95% of the right thought process and just missed one single little step in the deal. So if we can focus on the thought process and really coach to the thought process instead of the results, we can help people preserve their self-image. We can help them avoid feeling embarrassed. If leaders can ever be self-effacing and even remind their team of when they made mistakes or when they screwed up, that can even be more effective.
Just some simple tips in acknowledging people, but we still tend to overlook it most of the times.
We do, and as leaders, it's easy to understand. Like, it's not like we're saying somebody is a bad person or a bad leader, but how many times do we have meetings stacked on top of each other? Or now with our phones in our hands all the time, the emails and the messages are always there. So it's very easy to be moving from one commitment to the next, and we're not intentionally ignoring somebody. In fact, there may be times where we're so distracted, we walk by each other and don't even know we're there because we're so distracted. But unfortunately, the more we see somebody and do not engage with them, the more it tells them that we don't care about them. And the discrepancy on the organizational chart is really important. The higher level the executive and the lower on the org chart the person is they pass in the hall, the more important it is that they say hello, because the leader does represent their company. So if they continue to walk past people without saying hello, it's not only saying, I don't care, it's also saying the company doesn't care. So these little things we do every day can start to build and either create problems or cultivate a culture that is value or drives the value of our organization.
That's so true. So in relation to this discussion, I have a follow-up question for you. So since you're the founder of the disciplined learning method designed to teach professionals about converting commitment to action, you also mentioned that talking is actually the most important part of listening deeply. I'm really intrigued, and could I know more about that?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Thank you. When we talk about disciplined listening really is about elevating our contextual awareness and really looking and listening for strategic intelligence, getting out of that check the box, listening for information mindset and listening for strategic intelligence. What are things that can help us move this relationship, this conversation, this agreement forward. So when we think about that, there's really two avenues for talking, if that's the right phrase to use right now. We have the external and the internal. And very simply, if we are talking, we can't be listening. Our brains, we're not wired to be great multitaskers. So it's like, I don't know if you've ever tried to send an email and talk on the phone at the same time, but neither one of those conversations make any sense when we do it. So if we are talking while somebody else is talking, we may feel like we're listening, but certainly they don't think we're listening because we're talking over them. And while we may get a general idea of their communication, we are missing significant components of it. There may be nuances of their verbal delivery, their nonverbal behavior, specific word choice, things that we're missing because we're talking. So that external conversation gets thought of often. You know, if we're interrupting people, clearly we're not listening. However, perhaps the most dangerous conversation that has the biggest negative impact on our ability to listen is actually our internal monologue. It's us talking to ourselves. Very simply put, if you and I are having a conversation and you're talking to yourself while I'm talking to you, your internal monologue wins every time. Like, I can't possibly have something more important to say to you than you have to say to yourself. Like, it's just the way it works. And unfortunately, that internal monologue often focuses on how do we feel? So what are our emotions at the moment? And then those emotions start driving our decisions. We often talk to ourselves about what we want to say or do next. We often talk to ourselves about how somebody's actions or words are lining up with our expectations of them in this situation. And then we start jumping to conclusions and our biases start kicking in. And now we are missing a significant amount of the information that we're being presented with. Unfortunately, our brains really are wired to listen for opportunities to defend, not to learn. And so in order for us to truly maintain a high level of contextual awareness, and in order for us to truly empathize with others, especially now as we need to take into consideration all of the different things that may be impacting somebody's life and communication, we've got to be able to quiet our internal monologue in order to truly focus on what's happening in front of us.
Yeah, that's true. You brought to light some points that we don't really realize ourselves. We're not even aware of it.
And especially in the moments, it's natural. It's how our brains are wired. Again, so in that moment, as our emotions spike, you know, when it comes to observing behavior, one of the things that we love to say, and the certified forensic interviewers we all love to say, is anytime we see behavior change on the outside, that's typically a result of an emotion changing on the inside. And the greater the emotion changes on the inside, the stronger the behavior change on the outside is. Well, that's also true for our internal monologue. The stronger our emotions change, the more we talk to ourselves, the more we listen to ourselves, and the more we begin to manifest a new reality or a new perception that may not be true. And it makes it very easy for us to then have some pretty big errors in how we evaluate, how we interpret, and how we communicate.
Yeah, there's so much going on while just talking. I mean, it's like you can't multitask.
Not if the conversation is important to us, and not even if the conversation is important to us. If the conversation is important to us, we certainly should not be multitasking. But maybe to a more powerful degree, we also should not be multitasking if the conversation is important to the person who is talking to us. Because then to them, it feels like we don't care. And we're checking our phone, we're answering emails, we're looking at somebody else. Just being, it's said so many times by so many people, but being present. Not just so we give them the feeling that we're listening, which is important, but also that we are getting the totality of the message and therefore using the best approach and making the best decisions because of all the additional information we're now observing.
Right. So moving on to our present situation, the world is slowly starting to open up and there would be opportunities plenty. So do you think one must go about committing to something and sticking to it?
That's a great question, and sticking to it becomes the hard part, right? It's really easy to say this is what I'm going to do, but sticking with it isn't always the easiest piece. I think the first thing, and we touched on it before, that we can go back and think about is, why doesn't this work so often when people want to do something? So the first thing, and we mentioned it before, is it's important to realize that the number one reason why most adults will not commit to something new is that fear of embarrassment.
Yeah.
And it might be disappointment or judging or a word related to embarrassment, but it's not the fear of failure. It's the fear of, how will others perceive me if I fail? And maybe more importantly, how will I perceive myself if I fail? I have to look myself in the mirror and admit to myself that I failed. So when it comes to not only choosing something new, but also committing to it, one of the first things that we need to do is we really need to focus on the value. What is the potential outcome? Again, most of us, I don't want to say all of us, that's a terribly judgmental thing to say, but when you look at how our brains are wired, we hear it time and time again that people are often more motivated by fear of loss, because that's easy to experience. I know what I have and I don't want to lose it. So they're more motivated by fear of loss than they are of potential gain, because that potential gain is out there. We don't necessarily know what it feels like yet, so we can be safe and comfortable here. So one of the things that can be helpful with this is aligning our self-image. What makes us feel good about ourselves? Aligning our self-image, again, with the process, not the results. And not only accepting the fact that mistakes are going to happen, but really welcoming them, that these mistakes, these missteps, these pitfalls along the way, they're all just part of the process, and they're learning opportunities in and of themselves. So if we embrace the process and we embrace the opportunity to learn, it should, operative word should, be easier to commit and stick with it. Oftentimes as leaders, and even in our internal monologue, we run into people who say, I can't. A leader asks somebody to do something and they say, I can't do that. Well, I'm assuming that the leader is not asking somebody to do something that is outside the realm of physics. Like, it is actually possible for them to do it. So when somebody says, I can't do it, they're actually giving us a very important message. There's one word that they're leaving out of that statement. What they're really saying is, I can't do it easily. Because in their mind, there's a disconnect between the amount of effort that they have to commit and the perceived rewards that they're going to get. And that effort could be physical, emotional, cognitive. It could be a combination of the three. But in their mind, the effort that they have to put in isn't worth the reward that they think they'll get. So, I can't do it. So when we hear other people tell us I can't, it's really important that we don't think about taking that parental approach and just try to force them to. You have to, or else. Because that will just get compliance that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation and really only create longer term problems. The real key is to help them align their perception of effort and reward. And that's not only true for leaders, but it's true for us as well. So when we're in a situation and we think we want to try something, or maybe we've started going a new direction, and then we say, well, I can't do that. Well, hang on. The likelihood that that is actually true is pretty slim. What we're really saying right now is we don't necessarily feel like committing the effort based on what we think we'll get out of it. So if we can train our mind's eye to really focus on that potential value, it will be easier to overcome those I can'ts and really stick through the process long term.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Like, we get so stressed out thinking about how things will turn out, we forget to enjoy the process and, choose the easy way out.
Often, and when we think about stress, like, stress is literally an opportunity killer. When our stress levels rise, we start focusing on what do we need to do to alleviate this stress right now, make it go away. And so because of that, we're not looking for new opportunities. We're not appreciating the value in the work or the effort. So all we want to do is eliminate that stress because it makes us feel so uncomfortable. And we lose sight on new alternatives, new opportunities, progress we've made. So you make a great point about stress really being an inhibitor to us being able to achieve these goals that we set out for ourselves.
So, Michael, coming to the end of our interview, do you have any sound bites that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, I really appreciate the time today. Thank you very much. And really, I think a theme that we've kind of touched around but haven't hit on directly in our conversation, whether it's leaders interacting with other people or even ourselves as we try to move forward. Something that may be very important for people to stop and consider is time is the enemy of empathy. Anytime we have that ticking clock in the back of our mind, I have to be somewhere else, I should be doing something else, I'm already late, this is the next meeting or next conversation I have to get to. When we have that clock ticking in the back of our head, we're not truly focusing on who we're having a conversation with. We're actually focusing on wherever we think we have to be next or whatever our time constraint is. So because of that, we're not truly focusing on who we're talking to and what they're saying. So we can't empathize with them. We can't really put ourselves in their shoes. So if we're really going to listen to learn and listen for strategic intelligence, it does hinge on maintaining that learning mentality, being patient and allowing the conversation to come to us. A lot of times as leaders under a lot of pressure, we chase conversations and we chase them because we want to save time or we want to get the information. We have to remember that if somebody else has information and we need to get it from them, we're not in control of this conversation. They are. I don't care if you're the CEO, if you're the Chief Human Resources Officer, if you are in law enforcement, it doesn't matter. If somebody else has information and we need it, they're in control of this conversation. So being patient, letting the conversation come to us, taking that learning mentality and not focusing on the clock. The clock will take care of itself. If we allow the conversation to come to us and really observe for value and look to give people tangible evidence that we have listened, then we'll be in a much better place. It's important for leaders and really people everywhere to remember that people will perceive how we communicate with them as proof for how much we respect them. So if they feel like we're distracted, if they feel like we're rushed for time, if they feel like we're not listening, if they feel like we're not following up, if they feel like we're not giving them enough information consistently, then it feels like we don't care. And we may care very much, but unfortunately they can't see our intentions, our emotions. They only see what we share. So if we remember that people are going to perceive how we communicate as proof for how much we respect them, we remember that time is the enemy of empathy, and we slow the clock down in our mind and let the conversation come to us, then it will be much easier to control our internal monologue and focus on the value and find these learning opportunities and execute a lot of these other pieces that we've had the chance to talk about today.
That was such an insightful answer, Michael. Thank you so much for that. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you inviting me to join you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a great conversation.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.